Hi and welcome. I'm Andy Miochen. You are watching A News. Here are the headlines. Keir Starmer says he's ready to deploy British troops in Ukraine. Israeli hostages' families march to Knesset to mark 500 days of captivity. Humanitarian crisis in Congo deepens as M23 rebels advance into Bukavu. Thank you for tuning in. British troops could be sent to Ukraine as a peacekeeping force, according to the British Prime Minister. Keir Starmer's comments came just before emergency talks with European leaders on Ukraine in Paris and a day before possible first talks on the war between Russian and US delegations in Saudi Arabia.
Nobody wants the conflict to continue.
British Prime Minister Keir Starmer says he is prepared to send UK troops to Ukraine as part of a post-war peacekeeping mission. His comments come as talks aimed at ending the conflict are set to begin this week. Writing in the Daily Telegraph, Starmer said he did not take the decision to put British servicemen and women in harm's way lightly, but stressed that securing a lasting peace was crucial to deterring further aggression from Russian President Vladimir Putin. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said any real negotiations to end Moscow's war would involve Ukraine and Europe. He described this week's U.S.-Russia talks as a chance to gauge Putin's seriousness about peace. European leaders are also preparing for key discussions in Paris, where Starmer is expected to join German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk, NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte, and Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. French President Emmanuel Macron called the meeting to coordinate support for Ukraine. These developments follow a move by US President Donald Trump, who stunned European allies last week by announcing he had spoken with Putin about launching a peace process without consulting NATO or Ukraine. His Ukraine envoy, Keith Kellogg, later suggested that Kiev and European leaders might not have a seat at the negotiating table.
France is hosting European leaders for an emergency summit on the war in Ukraine. The meeting comes after US confirmed Europe will be excluded from Ukraine peace talks, and Russia also suggesting there is no role for Europe in any peace negotiations.
Leaders from Germany, Poland, Italy, as well as NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte, Ursula von der Leyen and Antonio Costa from the European Union are expected to be at an emergency summit in Paris on the topic of the war in Ukraine. Several countries were unhappy that the meeting was only for selected leaders and not a full European Union summit. However, the French presidency says Monday's meeting could lead to talks in other formats. It's after US Vice President J.D. Vance said that democracy was under threat in Europe. Political scientist Daniela Schwarzer told Reuters TV that the Munich Security Conference revealed significant shifts in global power dynamics, with the US being the key uncertainty.
Russia's war on Ukraine is one of those situations that the US has picked to say we will be a key player here to end this war. Now, it doesn't make the situation easier for Ukraine, in my view, because it is very difficult at this moment, first of all, to know exactly where the United States will be going in their positions. And the Trump administration has already put the Ukrainian leadership under big pressure in asking for a deal on raw materials without any clear return.
US President Donald Trump's Ukraine envoy Keith Kellogg says that Europe would not be included in Ukraine peace talks. It's after Washington sent out a questionnaire to European capitals about their security contributions. Schwarzer says Europe needs to work together.
The European Union really needs to make sure it is not split apart by the US administration. We have already been able to observe over the past few weeks of the Trump administration that he has closer ties with some and he doesn't meet others. For instance, the Italian Prime Minister or the Hungarian Prime Minister, they have a pretty good relationship and they seem to align on some issues that, for instance, the German and the French government don't align with the US administration on.
The prospect of a rapid settlement with the war in Ukraine has focused minds in Kiev and Europe on the urgent need for security guarantees and also on what role Europe may have to play should the United States remove its support to Ukraine and the continent as a whole.
U.S. President Donald Trump said that he expects to meet Russian President Vladimir Putin, quote, very soon to discuss ending the war in Ukraine. Trump told reporters that he is actively working towards peace and believes that both Putin and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky are willing to end the conflict. Trump also said Zelensky will be involved in peace talks. Moscow says it's open to a visit by U.S. President Donald Trump at any time. The Kremlin said a visit to Russia could happen whenever a mutual agreement is reached, adding that Washington could quickly lift personal sanctions on Russian officials. Kremlin's spokesman praised the phone call between Putin and Trump as a strong signal of a commitment to resolve problems through dialogue and talk about peace. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio met Saudi officials in Riyadh ahead of talks with Russia on ending the war in Ukraine. Rubio spoke with Saudi Foreign Minister Prince Faisal bin Farhan Al Saud. Meanwhile, Russia says its top diplomat Sergei Lavrov will meet Rubio and other U.S. officials on Tuesday. They will discuss Ukraine and U.S.-Russia ties. This will be one of the highest-level meetings between the two countries in years, ahead of a possible meeting between their presidents. The UK government has unveiled a multi-billion-pound plan to strengthen its steel industry and maintain its global competitiveness after the US announced 25% tariffs on imports of steel.
The UK government is taking steps to protect its steel industry and ensure its continued competitiveness by injecting a £2.5 billion investment into the business. It's also encouraging infrastructure projects to prioritise production. The British Department for Business and Trade is also seeking public feedback on a steel strategy. A consultation has been launched to address long-term challenges facing the sector, such as high electricity costs, unfair trading practices and scrap metal recycling. The move comes as next month's deadline for US tariffs on steel imports is fast approaching. British Business Secretary Jonathan Reynolds says the potential economic impact of the tariffs could increase costs for US taxpayers. Reynolds proposes that the UK and US have a mutual interest in negotiating an exemption. This is especially relevant as the UK supplies specialised steel products such as submarine casings from Sheffield for the United States. There are concerns the US tax hikes could severely damage the UK steel sector, which contributes £400 million annually to transatlantic trade. While the US market represents 10% of UK steel exports, it remains vital for specialised producers. The US tariffs are set to take effect on the 12th of March, and President Donald Trump has insisted they will be enforced without exceptions or exemptions.
Algerians in Paris staged a protest demanding that France acknowledge its colonial past and the atrocities committed in Algeria.
Algerians gathered in Paris to protest France's colonial policies, demanding acknowledgement of past atrocities committed in Algeria. Demonstrators called on the French government to officially recognise its historical crimes, particularly condemning the display of Algerian independence fighters' skulls in a Paris museum, according to Report Information Agency. They denounced it as an inhumane act that violates human dignity and urged their immediate return to Algeria. Protesters also highlighted the devastating impact of France's nuclear tests in Algeria, which caused thousands of deaths and led to the forced displacement of local communities. They accused France of plundering Algeria's resources, both material and cultural, and called for an official acknowledgement of the war crimes committed during colonization.
A week before German elections, tens of thousands gathered in Berlin, protesting policies and growing popularity of the far-right Alternative für Deutschland party. The AfD is expected to become the second largest party in the country following the February 23rd election.
Tens of thousands took to the streets of Berlin on Sunday to protest against the continued support for the far-right Alternative for Germany party. The demonstrations are ahead of the general election this Sunday. Organisers call for action against extremism, racism, anti-Semitism and social injustice, urging a strong defence of democratic values. They're encouraging everyone to vote.
It's 5 minutes to midnight for all of us. Our democracy is under fierce attack, be it from smear campaigns, disinformation, fake news, trolls, or from enemies of democracy within political parties and the media. They do not just want to jeopardise our peaceful liberal coexistence, they want to destroy it.
In a policy dubbed the firewall, parties have formed a consensus not to work with the AfD, which is under surveillance by the German Domestic Intelligence Service.
My motivation is to preserve democracy. The firewall, the principle of non-cooperation with the AfD, must remain in place. We need to set an example against the far right and the political shift happening not just in Germany, but across Europe and the world. This demonstration shows that everyone is welcome, and my goal is to keep the firewall alive.
I find it absolutely worrying that racism and right-wing narratives are becoming the norm. It goes completely against my values, my humanity, and the empathy we should all have. Every person counts, and no person is illegal. That's why I'm here. Why I take to the streets as often as I can. I have a voice. We all have a voice.
The rally comes after US Vice President J.D. Vance's call for the country to reconsider its stance on working with far-right parties after he met with AfD on Saturday. The spokesperson for AfD leader Alice Weidel confirmed the meeting, saying the two met at Vance's hotel for about 30 minutes and discussed the Ukraine war, German domestic policy and freedom of speech. The AfD has gained in the polls and is projected to achieve a record-breaking 20% of the vote. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz defended the German political party's decision to not work with the AfD, pointing out its links to Nazism. The Conservative Christian Democratic Union Party and the Christian Social Union is expected to lead the election.
Over in Jerusalem, families of Israeli hostages marked 500 days of their captivity. They rallied outside the Hostages and Missing Families Forum tent before marching to the Knesset, calling for the immediate release of all remaining hostages.
There are fears from the families of Israeli hostages that the ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas could break down before the end of the first phase. They're protesting in Jerusalem to mark the 500th day of their loved ones' captivity, demanding the release of all hostages. The emotional demonstration took place outside the Hostages and Missing Families Forum tent before a march to the Knesset.
This is the morning of the 500th day that the hostages are still in Gaza. And today we are marching, we begin right here near Prime Minister Netanyahu's house, and we're walking all the way to the Knesset, to the Israeli parliament, with a plight to make sure that this current deal continues until we see every single last hostage back home. Now, the fact that it's 500 days is unimaginable.
As of now, 19 Israeli and 5 Thai hostages have been freed, but 73 people remain in captivity. Approximately half of the remaining hostages have been declared dead in absentia by Israeli authorities. The ceasefire's second phase is intended to initiate talks for the release of those still alive. The Israeli Security Cabinet is scheduled to meet on Monday to discuss the next step and the fate of the remaining captives being held in Gaza.
Hamas is willing to let the Palestinian Authority take over governance of the Gaza Strip, according to a Sky News Arabia report. The group's only condition is that existing employees either keep their position under the new administration or receive retirement with secured salaries. Reportedly, the shift came under substantial pressure from Egypt. The Palestinian Authority already exerts political control over the West Bank. Iran will continue its nuclear program despite pressure from Israel and the United States, Tehran said. According to the Foreign Ministry spokesman Ismail Baghei, Iran's nuclear activities are in line with its rights as a member of the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. He said that Iran will not tolerate interference in its peaceful nuclear program, adding that one cannot, quote, threaten to destroy on one hand and claim to support dialogue and negotiations on the other. Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio vowed to thwart Iran's nuclear ambitions and regional influence. Rubio also accused Iran of fueling violence and instability across the Middle East. China is criticizing the U.S. for changing the Taiwan section of the State Department's website, calling it a serious regression in U.S. policy. The update removed a statement opposing Taiwan's independence and mentioned U.S. support for Taiwan's role in international organizations. Beijing urged Washington to uphold the One China principle, while Taiwan welcomed the change.
We urge the US side to correct its mistakes immediately, earnestly abide by the One China principle and the 3 Sino-US joint communiques, handle the Taiwan issue with great caution, stop using Taiwan to contain China, stop escalating the substantive relationship between the US and Taiwan, stop helping Taiwan expand its international space, stop condoning and supporting Taiwan independence, and avoid causing further serious damage to Sino-US relations and peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait.
The M23 rebels claim they have advanced into the port city of Bukavu. Congolese officials say troops have withdrawn to avoid urban fighting in densely populated areas.
The M23 rebels say they've taken a second city in eastern Congo. Bukavu residents say they have seen rebels passing through central districts with no sign of opposition. While the situation appears largely calm, verified footage showed smoke rising from the city's central prison, according to Reuters. Officials say the Congolese troops have withdrawn from that area to avoid fighting in densely populated places. Since capturing Goma in late January, the rebels were focused on taking over the key commercial center.
We want the authorities who are now in the city to help us with our security. Here in Bukavu, we have a serious problem with these young children who have already taken up arms. They are shooting in the neighborhoods, preventing people from going to work. We ask the authorities in the city to take these children, not to kill them, but just to take away their weapons so that every citizen can go about their daily activities as usual.
The rebels' rapid advance this year has raised fears of a regional conflict. These concerns are linked to old disputes over power, identity and resources dating back to the 1990s Rwandan genocide. The Democratic Republic of Congo is a leading producer of cobalt and is a significant copper exporter. It faces growing fears of how the conflict might impact its vital mineral exports.
The humanitarian situation in the DRC is worsening, with new areas being claimed by the rebels. Aid workers warn that access to vital supplies has been severely disrupted.
Humanitarian situation in Congo remains tense after M23 rebels advanced into the second largest city, Bukavu, local media says. They also have taken control of Kavumu Airport, a key hub for humanitarian and military operations, worsening the already dire situation in eastern DRC. The fighting has forced thousands to flee, while hospitals struggle to cope with the influx of wounded. Humanitarian organizations are facing major challenges in delivering aid.
The big hindrance at the moment is the access into Goma. As I mentioned, the airport is not yet open, and therefore it's difficult to bring in stocks. Many organizations lost their stocks to looting and have not been able to replenish.
At Caixero Hospital in Goma, medical staff are overwhelmed. Supplies are running out, and doctors are working around the clock to treat the injured.
In just 7 days, we treated 477 injured individuals. Our first challenge was that hospital staff worked continuously, some for up to 72 hours straight, to better serve the wounded. Our second challenge is that our supplies, including medications, have run out.
With over 110,000 displaced and thousands injured, the humanitarian situation remains critical. As regional tensions rise, international organizations are calling for urgent action to restore stability.
Dozens of people have been killed in an illegal gold mine collapse in Mali. At least 40 bodies have been retrieved. Nabil Ahmed Rufai brings more.
Officials in Mali say the miners were killed on Saturday when they tried to illegally recover gold from abandoned pits in the western part of the country. This comes barely a month after at least 10 people were killed in a mining tunnel when it got flooded. Mali is one of the world's largest producers of gold, and its economy is largely dependent on gold exports. Many in Mali engage in illegal gold mining to escape poverty, and accidents are not uncommon at illegal mining sites due to poor enforcement of safety measures. Last year, the government urged communities living close to mining sites to only work at sites reserved for gold panning, where gravel and soil are washed away to separate gold from other metals. It also urged stricter enforcement of existing safety regulations. But with gold prices nearly doubling in the last 5 years, more and more locals are turning to the business of illegal gold mining, as Mali faces its worst economic crisis in years. Nabil Ahmed Rufai for A News, Accra, Ghana.
A building collapse in Egypt's Giza province has left at least 10 people dead and several others injured or trapped under rubble. Reports say an explosion happened on the second floor of a building in an area near the Giza pyramids. Officials are investigating the cause of the collapse as search and rescue teams are working to find survivors under the rubble. At least 20 people have died following a stampede at New Delhi's railway station. The incident occurred as passengers rushed to board trains to a city hosting a religious festival.
A deadly stampede at New Delhi's main railway station has resulted in the deaths of at least 20 people and left many injured. The tragic incident occurred around 8 p.m. local time on 2 platforms as passengers eagerly awaited trains bound for Prayagraj, the city hosting the Maha Kumbh Hindu festival. The death toll includes women and children, according to local media reports. The stampede occurred as passengers rushed to board 2 delayed trains, causing a surge of chaos that led to the fatal crush.
There was a platform change announcement from platform number 12 to 16. The crowd on platform number 12 started rushing towards platform number 16, which was also crowded. This led to overcrowding and people were stuck. People started falling on the stairs and escalator. Then, all the porters ran to control the situation. We managed the crowd and rescued bodies from the rush. Then we helped shift the bodies into ambulances.
We were on our way to Prayagraj to attend the festival. We were at platform number 16 near Ajmeri Gate. We were walking when it suddenly got crowded. We were moving forward amid the crowd. We were going downstairs to platform number 14 when the stampede broke out. The crowd started pushing and people were falling over us. My wife passed away on the spot.
Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, along with several federal ministers, expressed condolences and confirmed the incident via posts on social media. However, they refrained from providing specific details about the number of casualties. The stampede follows a similar tragic event in January, when a deadly crush occurred at the Kumbh festival in northern India, where millions had gathered to take part in religious rituals. The incident has raised further concerns about crowd control and safety measures at major public events in India.
Staying with India, the country's aerospace industry is surging as companies like Airbus, Collins Aerospace and Rolls-Royce increase parts sourcing and encourage local firms to develop their capabilities further.
India's emerging aerospace industry is experiencing significant growth, driven by major companies like Airbus, Collins Aerospace, Pratt & Whitney, and Rolls-Royce, which are increasing parts sourcing from the country, according to industry insiders. Bengaluru-based Hical Technologies is one of the companies benefiting from this growth. A supplier to major players like Raytheon Technologies and Boeing, Hical aims to boost revenue from its aerospace division to 5 billion rupees, which approximately makes around $57 million within the next 3 years, as stated by the company's joint managing director. The Aerospace India Association projects India will capture 10% of the global aerospace supply chain by 2033 as the market hits $250 billion annually. CEO of Amado Tools highlighted India's resources, large population and technical expertise, noting the global trust global players now place in Indian suppliers.
Now there is a lot of trust that is being placed by the global players in Indian suppliers, which was not the case many years back. And if you look at the commercial scene as well, Boeing buying more than the Indian companies buying Boeing planes in thousands. Both Airbus and Boeing aircrafts are being bought in thousands, which was not the scene a few years back.
Indian firms, once limited to supplying parts for the $180 billion global aerospace industry, are now advancing to higher value tasks such as design, engineering, and system integration. Last week, the Ministry of Civil Aviation held a closed-door meeting with industry executives and associations to further discuss the industry's growth and challenges.
Well, that's all we have for you for now. Thank you for watching and do stay tuned to A News.